车！
救护车，快一点！
来人，帮我提一下。
Hello there, my name is Trish Lynch from IOHR TV. Thank you for being with us for another episode of our Human Rights TV. You're very welcome. Now, can you believe that it's been 30 years since the Tiananmen Square Massacre? It's without a doubt one of the most remarkable historical moments of the 20th century, where thousands of students and dissidents were killed in Beijing by the guns and tanks of the CCP army while demanding for democratic reforms. Today we are lucky to be joined by Jianli. At the time he was a student who was dreaming of democracy in California's University of Berkeley. He then went back to China to join the protest. He's a survivor of the massacre. Mr. Jianli was detained in China in 2002 and kept in solitary confinement for the majority of his detention. Today he is a scholar and a world-renowned human rights activist. Thankfully, he's here with us today to share with us what he saw on that fateful day and to tell us about the reality of China today, 30 years later. Dr. Yang, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you left China when you were 23 to study at the University of California. At the time, communism was collapsing, states were seeking democracy, and your fellow Chinese students, they elected you to go back to Beijing to support your counterparts. Tell me why they selected you and why you agreed to go in the first place.
Okay. I used to be a party member, and that time I was enticed to join the party with an idea of reforming it from within. But soon I found it is almost impossible. It was the party that changed us more than we changed the party. So I decided to leave China. So I went to United States to study for my PhD degree in mathematics. When the student movement broke out in Beijing, and we of course all followed very closely in California, everywhere actually, and I suddenly felt that there's a hope, because I was disenchanted, I left China, now I had hope, and I want to join. I think this opportunity for us to change China, and because I was very active in the student activities on campus. All the students knew me very well. They knew I used to be a student leader back in China. So they elected me to go back to join the demonstrations in Beijing. So I went back to Beijing in the middle of May, the day after the martial law was declared. I got in Beijing and joined my fellow students there.
Now, you were there on that tragic night on the 3rd of June, 1989, when the army took control of the protests, which had been going on for almost 2 months. Tell me what happened on that night. Tell me what your recollection is.
Yeah, by midnight of June 3rd, is almost early morning of June 4th, I got very close to Tiananmen Square with a friend. When massacre began, the gunshot began. We heard from west side of Beijing, and we saw troops moving slowly toward Tiananmen Square. As this moved, they opened fires to both sides, because people were standing on both sides of the streets and shouting and tried to block them, and they just killed their way to Tiananmen Square. At one point, my friend and I were very close to the soldiers. We could shout up to them in their trucks, very close. And we tried to tell them not to shoot. And we told them they had no idea what was going on in Beijing. And we tried to touch their hearts. Each time when they received the order, they opened a fire.
And were you shocked that things had taken such a turn? Peaceful protests for 8 weeks, and then all of a sudden gunfire, people dying at your feet. It must have been a traumatic experience.
It's a traumatic experience, and at first it was unreal for us. We could not imagine that the troops could move into the center of Beijing and open fires on people. We thought we would be able to block them. We were very naive, and also we did not expect, killings would happen like that. But when the first open fire, we thought, it's real or not?
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And when we saw people killed and the body carried to us, we saw it, and we couldn't take it. And we tried to attack back in our own way, stones and everything, and we got very close. We tried to persuade them. We tried to touch their heart, not to kill anymore. But things went on, and I saw many people killed, including on the early morning of June 4th, 11 students were chased and run over by tanks.
Speaking of tanks, the symbol of Tank Man is a symbol of what happened in Tiananmen Square. It was a man with shopping bags standing in front of columns of tanks. Now, to this day, 30 years later, nobody knows who he is or where he's from. They don't know anything about Tank Man. Why do you think they still don't know who this iconic figure in history is?
Yeah, the photo of Tank Man is one of the most famous images of last century. But who was the Tank Man, as you just asked? And for nearly 30 years, people have wondered what became of him. But to this day, his fate, identity are still a mystery. This mystery lingers because the Chinese government has made every effort to suppress the truth about Tiananmen. Today in China, those people who dare to remember still face brutal persecution. So the government is suppressing truth. Nobody can talk about the truth. So people still don't know who this Tank Man is.
There is a possibility that he's still alive and he's still out there, but for his own safety.
I hope he's still alive.
Maybe one day we will find
One day
the answer.
we will find him.
Yeah.
But I always try to remind everybody who happened to talk to me about Tank Man. Mm-hmm. I try very hard to remind them there is another Tank Man. If you see the photo, you see the driver of the front tank did not open fire.
Okay.
We have to remember the massacre was still going on. So the photo was taken on the morning of June 5th while the massacre was still going on. So soldiers still receive orders to kill. Actually, in other spots, the killing was still going on. Why not this driver? Why did not this driver open fire or run over?
And as you say, it would be interesting to know what happened to him.
Yeah, I want to know what happened to him. Most likely, this driver, I call him the second Tank Man, disobeyed the order to kill. And for doing so, he probably received the punishment himself. There are two heroes in one picture.
That's a very good point. Now, in 2002, you then went back to China to support the labour movement. You were arrested and you were sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Right.
The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention ruled that you were held by the Chinese government in violation of international law, and the US called on China to release you. What actually happened?
So by the time I would decide to defy the ban, that was 2002. The labor movement broke out in China, and by that time I had already been deprived the right to return home, because my passport expired. And in party's eyes, a former young communist star had now become a public enemy, a traitor. So I became a persona non grata. But I decided to defy this ban because I sensed the opportunity to forge bonds between democracy leaders and the grassroots activists. So I entered China using borrowed passport.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So I was okay at first, and I worked with the labor movement for 2 weeks. I got arrested while trying to leave China.
Do you still have family members living in China?
Yes, I do have siblings living in China.
And are they safe in light of what you do and who you are?
In the first years after Tiananmen Square, they really had serious trouble because they were targeted, closely watched. They had to report on me on a regular basis. But they also were under pressure to try to persuade me to give up the work I do. But for so many years, the authorities, I think, reached a realization that is, they would not
It's
do anything
pointless.
about it.
Yeah. Now, after your release in 2007, you founded the movement Initiatives for China Citizen Power. Tell me more about that, and has anything changed positively in the 30 years since Tiananmen Square?
The Citizen Power Initiatives for China commits itself to empower the people of China in whatever way they can come up with, to defend their own rights and defend the rights of others, and also to do everything possible to peacefully advance democracy and human rights in China. So our goal is peaceful transition to democracy in China. And this organization is not membership-based organization. There's no boundary. Whoever think they are citizens of China who support and share our views and support the goal, they can be a member. Another question is, what positive changes have taken place in China after Tiananmen Massacre? On the surface, the regime remains the same, and even worse maybe in many ways, especially after Xi Jinping took power. China has gone backward politically, economically, so rapidly. And people have begun talking about a cultural revolution. And in recent months, I call China fascism with Chinese characteristics. So I said a few times at Geneva summit. And it's very bad. But one thing significant has taken place, and that is the minds of the people.
Minds of people are now open.
Open.
Yes.
And the concept of human rights, democracy prevail in people's public discourse. But that does not necessarily translate into any concrete actions. But in their minds, they know what is right, what is wrong.
Let me ask you this, because you spoke about the safety of your family. But tell me how safe you feel carrying out your work in the US, because I believe that some of your campaigns have actually been hacked. How safe do you feel?
We are constantly hacked. Our computers and email accounts, cell phones, especially when the so-called sensitive dates are around. So we are always attacked from the Chinese government. The Chinese government is making every effort to find information about people like myself, what I'm up to, what I want to do, when would be next big conference, what we will do at conference, in this country, who I will meet with.
Do you believe that the long arms of China can extend way beyond China to the US? Well, they obviously can.
Of course, they already did.
Yes.
They already did.
Yeah. We know that a lot has happened since 1989. There's been many changes in the world. The internet arrived. And of course, history, as we know, has been modified to wipe out almost all reference to the protest, other than to paint the students as violent. Do you think that the state control has expunged the true memory, or do you think it will live on, but in an underground fashion? In China, obviously.
In China, memory will live on. for sure. And
So people do talk about it, but
of course,
behind closed doors.
Yeah, of course.
And the real facts are spoken of.
Exactly. Across the dinner table, wherever there's no control, people do talk about these topics, do talk about Tiananmen Square. And when we say there is a collective amnesia about the incident, we call the key word is collective. Mm-hmm. But individually, everybody remembers.
I know China's messaging platform WeChat introduced new terms of service, and the data of 900 million users is now available to the government. What can you tell us about how China is able to control everybody through technology?
That is devastating.
Yeah.
When I first went to US, friends recommended me to read a very important book, 1984. When I read the book, of course, it was very enlightening. But I had no moment, not even one moment, believe that would happen in China. Mm-hmm. But it is now reality in China. The Chinese government uses technology to watch people. So we have a massive digital surveillance system in China. Even in remote countryside, on the electric lines, you can see cameras, like sparrows sitting on it. In every campus, every classroom, there are cameras. And
so everyone is monitored when they're in a public space?
Yeah. So,
and even in a private space, if the data of 900 million
people. And the Chinese government is building a so-called social credit system. Oh. They keep a record of people, each one, the history, what they're doing, and all the, you're a bad guy or good guy. They give, some kind of rating on everybody. So that's scary.
Could you see this kind of big brother approach taking hold in other parts of the world? Because we live in a world where conflict is rife. Could you see this taking off in other parts of the world?
I don't see it is happening in any other parts of the world except China. We have to assume that. And in China, of course, that's a reality.
Yeah.
So you live in a world where the big brother is watching every day, every moment, everywhere.
Are there just key people who are they suspicious of? Are these just the people that they check, or do they randomly just check the data?
Of course, they target the people.
Yeah.
Then they randomly check.
If I could guide you to the umbrella movement which unfurled in Hong Kong, protests managed to hold the streets for 79 days before the authorities were able to subdue them. What result do you think can be achieved by doing something like this?
The umbrella movement did not achieve anything institutionally. What I want to say is they were not able to make any change in the system, but they did build a base in Hong Kong for the future movement. It's always, one thing built on another, and now I think majority people of Hong Kong do not trust the government. They know what the government is up to. Mm-hmm. They will encroach in every field in Hong Kong, totally opposite to what they promised many, many years ago.
IOHR has been advocating for the Uyghurs and the ethnic minorities that are being persecuted in northwest China. Do you think that now it's only advocacy groups outside of China that are able to highlight their particular case?
Our fear is that the Chinese government is going to roll out the model to entire China. They actually experimented that model in Tibet, then moved to Xinjiang, and they are about to roll that model to the entire China. Of course, this atrocity have received tremendous international attention and condemns, and they may be careful about next step. But this is just another example to show what I said, China now has become a fascist state. After the Holocaust of the Jewish people in the World War II, we people vowed never again, never again.
And it's happening.
It's happening. It's happening in China.
What do we think
concentration camps. So that's what Hitler did. Now Xi Jinping is doing it.
What happens to those people once they go in? Do we have any details, any data on them?
This is just a prison with education programs, with a brainwashing program, more brainwashing programs than the normal prison. It's just a prison.
30 years on from the Tiananmen Square massacre, tell me what the future holds for China.
One thing that is very important, that is change in people's mind. But that does not necessarily means people will take action. So I still believe our hope resides on that the people will take action together. That's four necessary conditions that I always describe. We need four conditions come together for a change in China. One is discontent with the regime, general discontent among the people of the regime. Is already existing. It has existed for many, many years. Number two, viable opposition. That is what I meant by coming together to do something. The number three is cracks on the leadership of China. Actually, the second factor and the third factor are mutually reinforcing. And the fourth condition, last but not least, the international support, the international recognition of the viable democratic opposition and support at very critical moment, at the moment of a revolution. After Tiananmen Massacre, the major countries came together condemning the atrocity, but none of them actually believed that was the moment of a revolution. So they did not support the movement with concrete actions. They only gave lip service condemning the massacre committed by the Chinese government, which is fine, which we really appreciate.
But it's not enough.
But not enough.
Dr. Yang, we thank you for joining us today and sharing with us your incredible story 30 years on from the Tiananmen Square massacre. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us for another episode of IOHR TV. Please do join us again for our next episode. Until next time, for myself, Trish Lynch, goodbye.